Hello everyone, welcome to Hope is Not a Tactic here in the DisruptEdTV.com network. I'm your host, Lieutenant Joe Pangaro, and today is part 2 in our series about the shooting at Parkland High School. The title of this week's episode is What Went Wrong? So last week we took a look at the events as they unfolded, where the shooter entered the building, how he attacked everyone, and what happened to the unfortunate people in that building. Today we want to take a few minutes and think about what could have been in place, what could they have done there at the school to maybe have prevented this. One of the things we talk about here all the time is time equals life. That means the longer you can keep the shooter away from potential victims and someone can call for help, the better off people are going to be. That's how people are going to survive an event like this. Unfortunately, we don't know when these people are coming. We have no idea when they're going to attack us. So we don't have to be paranoid about these things, but we have to be aware and prepare. These are our messages we say all the time. So aware and prepare means you have to assume that maybe somebody might come and try and hurt you. So what can you do? Well, we know in this particular case, the shooter, Cruz, showed up in an Uber vehicle, like a cab type of thing. He showed up and he walked through an unmonitored, unmanned gate at the school. Nobody was watching. There was no camera on it. Nobody paying attention. That means he had free reign to go to that building. When he actually got to the school building, building number 12, where he committed his terrible acts of shooting, there was nothing stopping him from walking into that school. The door simply was open. He walked right in and he began his attack. So when we look at these things, we say the purpose of locked doors is to ensure that people don't have free access to us. When those students are in those classrooms, they are vulnerable. So having the doors locked would have been the first simplest thing that they could have done. If you're going to leave the doors open because it's time for big movement of kids that have to run around the campus, then you have to have somebody on that scene with the radio and a set of eyeballs watching those doors at every point of entry. When somebody's coming in or out, there has to be somebody monitoring what's going on. In the case in Parkland, they had security monitors who saw something strange and they didn't react quickly. They didn't put the school into lockdown when they saw something strange. Now, admittedly, we have to say that the shooter in this case was a school-age young man. So when their initial reaction is to see a school-age young man walking around the school, that in and of itself is not going to be suspicious. Once they recognized him, though, as a student who didn't belong in that building, carrying a bag, that is the very first incident that a lockdown should have occurred. We have our security monitors seeing him, recognizing him, calling to other security monitors, telling them this kid is on campus and he just went in the building. Well, if those doors were monitored, as he got to the door, they could have stopped him right then and there. Hey, what are you doing here? If he grabs the bag and he tries to reach for a gun, that's a confrontation, but at that point the doors are still locked. He can't get into those kids. Now we know in past shooting events that our shooters have entered the building either through open doors or they've used their firearm to shoot the glass and drop it. Are there things we can do to our glass that prevents it from dropping instantaneously? The answer to that is yes. There is safety glazing that you can put on the glass. All right? The safety glazing is not bulletproof, but what it does is you can shoot through it, you can hit it with a hammer, you can do all kinds of things. It slows the entry point down. So somebody with a sledgehammer, a grown man even, trying to bash out the glass of a door at an entryway or a window is going to take an extra 2 minutes or so to get that glass out of the window. In 2 minutes, we will know someone's attacking us. We can call a lockdown, we can call for help, we can secure people. So there's a couple things that went wrong here. Nobody was watching. When people did recognize that this was somebody who shouldn't have been on campus, nobody called that lockdown. That lockdown has to be something we go to right away. Another thing I think we see here is that when you look at the timeline, from the time the shooter showed up till the time that the first person called the lockdown was about 5 minutes into the incident. 5 minutes into the incident since they recognized this was not a person who should have been there till the shooting was over. 5 minutes is a long time. If they had locked that campus down immediately, we would have saved some people. Now, We all have to understand, the reason I said in the beginning that we don't know when these people are coming is we don't. They have the element of surprise on us. All we can do is be prepared to slow them down enough time to give us a chance to survive. So locking down quickly is important. Who can call a lockdown? We see all the time at True Security Design when we do our threat assessments, we see all the time that many schools have a policy that says everyone in the school is empowered to call a lockdown. And then we go and we speak to the teachers, the custodians, the lunch personnel, and the majority, the large majority of them will say, I don't know, I think the principal calls the lockdown. I didn't know I'm allowed to call a lockdown. This is something we have to make crystal clear to everyone. Everyone on your campus should be empowered to call a lockdown if they see danger. You see danger coming, approaching danger. How many times can we talk about this? You see that approaching danger, you call a lockdown. Now, your local police, having a good relationship with them is extremely important. I know when I was a school security director, I had a great relationship with the law enforcement agencies around me. The chiefs in those departments both said, we would rather have you call a lockdown than to not call one when it is needed. So by practicing with my staff, by training them what is suspicious, what should they be concerned about, we did not have many false lockdowns. We only had 3 in about 5 years. And they were because people saw something, they weren't sure what it was, it looked suspicious, and they locked us down. The police responded, investigated, it turned out it was not a danger. But what happened is we reacted quickly. The schools were in lockdown, the children were safe. We had a student who actually saw Cruz with the gun, and that student ran out, and he did tell somebody. He told one of the security monitors that, hey, there's a guy in there with a gun. What do we do to prepare our students? See, sometimes that's missing in our mix. We do the lockdowns with the kids, but we don't do much more with them. Do we train them to see something, say something? Now, we know statistically that every time there's one of these school shootings, we have to look at it, investigate it, and learn the lessons that are there for us. Some of the lessons that we see here, time and time again, is that some, if not many, people knew that whoever the shooter was somebody who was having problems, having difficulties, was a potential threat. They had said things in school, on social media, they had written and drawn things, but nobody says anything. So when we investigate these things, we find out there's usually 2 reasons that these kids don't come forward. Number 1, they don't want to be a rat. They don't want to be the one pointed out as the person who said somebody was doing something, because what if they're wrong? And number 2, they don't want to get involved. They don't want to get involved in this because it creates a turmoil, and they can't trust anybody at home or at school. And when you look deeper than that, you mean they can't trust their parents, they can't trust their school teachers? What they mean when they say they can't trust anyone, they can't trust anyone not to overreact. Do we overreact and drag these kids in who are trying to tell us something? So what is the answer to that? Well, messaging. We have to involve these students in messaging and tell them, if you recognize someone doing something suspicious, if they're making threatening statements, if they're saying things on social media, if they're writing kill lists or hate lists, someone has to be told about it. Now, how do we overcome the 2 problems why they don't tell? There are things out there called tip apps. Okay, back in the day, they used to have a tip line, on a phone. People would call on a phone. Most kids don't dial a phone today. They do everything through texting and through apps on their phones. So there are lots and lots of apps that you can get on a cell phone that are anonymous, where these kids can go on and tell you, hey, Jonathan has a kill list. He's making crazy statements about hurting people. Somebody look at it. And it's anonymous. We know that these work. We know that the messaging works. In the past couple of months, we've had 2 incidents averted at 2 different school systems because students came forward to tell the authorities, people in the school or the police, that one of their students that they're in school with was making threats and was potentially dangerous. And they averted 2 major school shootings.
Okay, so now that my hideaway helper is secure in a place, I want to show you how quick and easy it is to use in any sort of emergency situation. When there is a lockdown situation, someone simply needs to come over, pull the tab quickly and look at how quickly the hideaway helper covered up the window. As you can see, no window is showing, so that it has full coverage.
This is how we're going to help protect people. It's more than just responding when the shooting starts, it's preventing that shooting in the beginning. So a tip app is a great piece of equipment that you should consider for your district. There are lots and lots of tip apps out there. If you don't know where to go, you can call me at True Security Design. I'll point you in the direction of a whole bunch of them. You can find them. Go online. Tip apps. There's tons of them out there. There are some out there that are absolutely free to the school district. They want you to use them. I know one of my first guests here was Michelle Gay from Safe and Sound Schools. Michelle's organization offers a free one. Safe and Sound Schools. Give them a call. Call me. We can help you get them. But a tip app is going to help us so that kids can tell us in advance who the potential problems are. Then we can intervene before this happens. And the next thing we're going to look at was the response from 911. The response from 911 tells me there was a couple problems. It was the actual 911 communication system that they had available in that area, where the calls, the police department that handled the Parkland High School was the sheriff's department, but the phone call went to the Coral Springs Police Department. So the Coral Springs operator had to take that call, get the information, and then pass it along to the police that were handling the school. So we have a phone call that was recorded, one of the 911 calls. We'd like to listen to that closely, and then we'll talk about it for a minute.
911, what's your emergency?
Hello, we're at Summit Douglas High School, and I think there's a shooter.
Hello? You still there? Talk to me, please.
What is your emergency?
Yes, I just got a call from Douglas High School. A female on the line advised that they believe there's a shooter at the school.
Okay, at Douglas High School in
Yes,
what city?
in Parkland. 5901
Oh,
Pine
okay.
Island.
5901 Pine Island?
Yes.
Okay, let me see if they're working anything there. And a second-hand information from a student?
A female called in. It sounded like possible shots in the background. I think I heard 5 or 6 in 2 different bursts.
So what you heard in that call was the dispatcher. And coming from law enforcement, I can tell you, dispatchers are some of the hardest working people we have in law enforcement. Their job is not easy. They are taking phone calls from people that are hysterical, that are upset, that are intoxicated, that are having mental difficulties. They have to decipher the information that's coming to them very quickly, and then make sure that the officers get dispatched with the proper information that the cops need to go do their job and be safe. So in that phone call, we heard, you know, there was a little bit of delay there. Are there shots fired? Are there not shots fired? What's going on at the school? There was some communication difficulty, and then the police were dispatched. Does your local 911 system, are the numbers correct? Do they go to the right place? This is something you want to check with your sheriff's department, your police department, your local 911 emergency center. Where do your calls go to? Does your staff have the ability to reach out and call 911? Can they do it? Do they have applications on their phone where they can open up an application, hit lockdown, and it goes out to the police and to everybody in the community? All the teachers, all the administrators, everyone knows, room 305, there's a problem, we need to lock down. I hear gunshots outside the gym. Whatever it is, there are apps that can help us do this. It can speed things up, because what? Time equals life. The faster we get the information, the faster we can respond. So you see how all of these things come together in this particular tragedy. They were very, very clear that we missed the signs of potential danger. When we saw the potential danger, we didn't react. When we finally did react, the system was difficult for people to manage. So 911 wasn't called right away. There was no ability to do it. We didn't have anybody calling a lockdown. The sheriff's officer, the armed sheriff's officer assigned to the school, was there. He didn't call that actual lockdown until about 5 minutes or so into the incident. You know, last week we showed you the timeline, and you can see on there almost 5 minutes had expired from the time of the first gunshots till the time the lockdown was called. That is a problem. I mean, as soon as somebody saw danger, that lockdown should have happened. What is your policy and procedure? Do you practice randomly having teachers in classrooms go into a classroom and say, hey, put the school into lockdown? Does that teacher know how to do it? Are they aware how to get onto the intercom system? Do you have an intercom system? How would they even do that? We see many times teachers will be confused and they'll say, well, we have to call the office. The office says we have to find the principal to do the lockdown. You know how much time that takes? How many different ways that has to go? So time equals life is our key, so we want to go fast. So we have a response problem, we had a training problem, we had a 911 problem. Now we have this young man in the building doing the terrible things that he did, and he escapes the building. The video cameras, we find out that when law enforcement got to the office and they were watching the cameras, you'll see in the report that they were watching a delayed video. They were watching video that had already happened. They thought he was still in the building, and the shooter was already gone. He had escaped the building, dropped his weapon, and took off.
They are monitoring the subject right now. He went from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor, 3rd to the 2nd floor. He may have a gas mask on now. Stand by for further. They're monitoring him on camera. I'll stand by for further. He dropped the bag near the stairwell. Stand by for further. Call 148. Is that for recording? Is that getting the school? Yes, sir. They're following him. It's about a 20-minute delay. They're following him on video, on the camera. They had him exiting the building, running south.
So are your cameras on time delays? Are you seeing real live time that's going on, or are you seeing something else? What we see in this particular attack is that students were killed on the 1st floor and on the 3rd floor. Teachers also. The 2nd floor was not, because apparently it seems though that people on the 2nd floor might have heard the gunshots and taken some action to lock their doors, to cover their windows. At least some of them covered their windows so that people couldn't see in. But the people on the 3rd floor didn't know it. Now, the fire alarms went off. There's a lot of questions when the story first came out of what caused that. It seems that the gunshots caused dust to fall off the ceiling tiles, and set the fire alarms off. And people on the 3rd floor didn't know that there was shooting going on. You get a fire alarm, you step outside. Once they were outside, they were caught in the hallway. And the shooter shows up on the 3rd floor and he starts shooting, and that's where he kills more people there. We found that kids couldn't get into the bathrooms because they were locked. We mentioned this last week because of the vaping problem. So the bathrooms on the 1st and 3rd floor were locked. Terrible, terrible timing for all this. This was the perfect storm of everything that could have went wrong. Do you have armed officers on your campus? Do you have armed security? Or do you have just regular security monitors? If you have armed personnel, what is their training? Now this is very, very important to go back to your police department and find out. One of the things we talk about when we do our program Plan and Prepare is, what is the liaison relationship? How do you get along with your local police? Do they visit your schools regularly? Do you have an SRO? Do they ever show up at your school? Some places you never see the police. They don't know your buildings. What is the policy? What are the police going to do when they get there? How do they respond? Does your staff know what the cops are going to do when they get there? Do they know what it's like? When the police respond, they're going there looking for a shooter. In this particular case, apparently the sheriff had created the policy about active shooters that said the officers may go in if they hear gunshots. The policy should be, you shall go in if you hear gunshots. That's why we take an oath and carry a gun. It's very dangerous work, but if the officers' first priority was to get into that building when they heard gunshots, they might have saved more people. So what is the policy of your police department? As a community, you need to find out. If your policy says you may go in if you hear shooting, you might want to talk to them and say, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea if you hear shooting, you go in first? That's your first response. There's a lot of training out there for police departments on how to do this. I trained my cops. You got to go in fast. You have to find that shooter, and you have to either arrest them, contain them, or eliminate them by the use of force. This is where you need to look at your policy, look at your procedures, look at your training. Talk to your students. Let them know that they should come forward. Talk to your teachers. Let them know how to call lockdowns. Practice having them call the lockdowns. Find out what your active shooter response is from your local police. Run a drill in your school with the police so that they can actually come to your building. Invite them to come there and see the buildings. If you have unarmed security, make sure that they have the ability and the training to know the minute they recognize danger, put the place in lockdown. It's better to go into lockdown and find out that it wasn't a danger than to find out you should have went into lockdown, as in this case. If you don't have a security director, get a consultant. If you don't want to get a consultant, create a committee. Look at your policies and procedures, work with your local police, and practice to do the right thing. This is how we are prepared, and we are aware of what's going on, and this is how we keep people safe. So in our third part in this series, next week, we're going to talk about the mental health issue here. Now, we don't talk about mental health in America. We whisper about it, we dance around it, but no one is looking at it. And what I told you here on Hope is Not a Tactic, that we are going to deal with this. So, did they know about this young man before he attacked that school? They did. They had lots of run-ins with this guy. Why wasn't something in place to help him? The Sandy Hook shooter, they knew about him. His mother was trying to do something with him, but he kind of fell out of the loop. We have to make sure there's a component in place that if somebody has a problem, we deal with it. We deal with it effectively before it erupts into violence. We can intervene, we can save the potential victims, and we can save the person who might be a shooter from committing such horrible acts if we intervene first. So in our third episode, we're going to talk about what went wrong here in Parkland. They knew about Mr. Cruz. They knew about some of his problems. Where did it fall short? So thank you for joining us this week here on Hope is Not a Tactic on the DisruptEdTV.com network. And we'll see you next week.
Okay, so now that my hideaway helper is secure in a place, I want to show you how quick and easy it is to use in any sort of emergency situation. When there is a lockdown situation, someone simply needs to come over, pull the tab quickly, and look at how quickly the hideaway helper covered up the window. As you can see, no window is showing so that it has full coverage.